Welcome to the MyAZ Lawyers Law Firm podcast. We provide the right resources on criminal defense and family law so you can stay informed. The attorneys at MyAZ Lawyers have the knowledge and expertise needed for your case and will give you the tools to protect your rights. This podcast series is reviewed and approved by attorney Candace Callan.
In this podcast, we'll talk about the charges you could be facing if you're ever charged with domestic violence and what to do if you're arrested in Arizona. Domestic violence is a sad but unavoidable truth in many relationships. Many people were raised in volatile households and don't know when the line is crossed from regular arguments to domestic violence. Others are fully aware and use domestic violence to maintain control in an abusive relationship. In Arizona, domestic violence is an indicator added to your charge to make it clear that the victim was someone with whom you have a close relationship. Given the case, will you only be charged with domestic violence? Make no mistake, domestic violence is a crime, or else you wouldn't have been arrested for it. It is always illegal to assault another person, regardless of the relationship you share with that person. But if you're arrested for domestic violence, you probably won't just see literally domestic violence in the charges against you. There are several other criminal charges that can apply in domestic violence situations, and these may include trespassing, criminal damage, unlawful imprisonment, assault, disorderly conduct, preventing use of phone in an emergency, and interference with judicial proceedings. Now, let's answer the question, is domestic violence considered a felony or misdemeanor in Arizona? If this is your first domestic violence conviction, you will have to complete at least 26 weeks of domestic violence counseling. This is mandated by the state and can't be waived by the court. For a second conviction in a 7-year period, there is mandatory supervised probation and at least 1 year of domestic violence counseling. These are both, on their own, misdemeanor convictions. A third domestic violence conviction in a 7-year period will be charged as aggravated domestic violence, which is a felony. So, what are the punishments if you're convicted? A domestic violence conviction will have several negative repercussions on your life. The penalties you will face will depend on which class of misdemeanor with which you are charged. If you are facing felony domestic violence charges, the punishments will be much harsher. If you are convicted of a Class 3 misdemeanor domestic violence charge, the maximum penalties are $500 in fines, 1 year of probation, and 1 month in jail. The maximum penalties for Class 2 misdemeanors are $750 in fines, 2 years of probation, and 4 months in jail. The maximum penalties for Class 3 misdemeanors are $1,500 in fines, 3 years of probation, and 6 months in jail. We are frequently asked, what types of relationships qualify for domestic violence? You can't be charged with domestic violence for an altercation with a random stranger passing you on the street. You must have a certain type of relationship with the victim for domestic violence charges to apply. While most people think of domestic violence as violence between two romantic partners, it can actually apply in other circumstances. For example, you can be charged with domestic violence if the victim lives in your household. Domestic violence charges can also apply for former romantic partners, parents of each other's children, or someone who is pregnant with the other's child. The domestic violence victim can be related to the aggressor either by blood or by law. It is also considered domestic violence if the victim is the child of the aggressor's romantic partner. But if a couple is fighting, who is going to get arrested if the police are called? The first thing the police like to do is physically separate the parties involved in the domestic dispute. Everyone there, including witnesses, will be interviewed, so the police can have a clearer version of events. They will also examine all the available physical evidence, including physical injuries. It will then be up to the police to piece together each party's statement and the evidence at the scene to decide who was the aggressor and who was the victim. Most of the time, the police are required to arrest someone if there has been a domestic violence altercation. You can expect that if the police show up after a domestic violence physical altercation, someone will be spending the night in jail. If you believe you are wrongly brought in as the aggressor in the situation, you will need to create a legal defense with your Arizona defense attorney. You can either use a court-appointed public defender or hire your own private defense attorney. Let's now review some examples of domestic violence. Domestic violence doesn't only mean physical violence in an argument between a couple. If someone is arrested for hurting another family member, such as their parent or child, their charges will also be designated as domestic violence charges. If someone tried to keep their roommate barricaded inside their room or prevent them from calling the police, this would also qualify as domestic violence. Someone could also be charged with domestic violence for abusing their partner's child. Domestic violence encompasses a broad array of crimes against several types of people. You might be wondering, should I use self-defense when facing domestic violence? You have the right to protect yourself if someone, including your romantic partner, is trying to physically harm you. However, many people don't realize there are limits to what is acceptable self-defense. First, deadly force can only be used in self-defense if you reasonably believe someone is going to kill you or sexually assault you. Self-defense must be reasonable and proportionate. Reasonable means that your anticipation was appropriate. When looking at what is proportionate, the court will take into account the parties' relative sizes and strengths. So, if a 5'2" wife slaps her athletic 6'3" husband across the face, it isn't proportionate for him to defend himself with several closed fist punches. However, the facts in most domestic violence situations aren't so clear-cut. Finally, can I convince my partner to drop the charges against me? In Arizona, the state is the one pressing charges and prosecuting domestic violence charges, not the victim. Your partner can give input to the prosecution about the event, but it will ultimately be up to the prosecution to decide whether to pursue charges. If there is a protective order in place, do not violate it to discuss the charges with the victim. The best thing to do is discuss your next steps with your defense attorney. Remember, always seek experienced defense representation to fight against serious charges in Arizona. A domestic violence conviction not only comes with strict penalties, but will be a mark on your criminal record that can follow you for the rest of your life. A domestic violence conviction can also impact other important situations in your life, such as child custody proceedings. It could decrease your chances of being hired for jobs and having your applications accepted for residential rental communities, and more. With all that's on the line, you may not trust leaving your future in the hands of a government attorney. In a criminal matter, you always have the right to hire your own attorney rather than one the court appoints for you. Your private defense attorney can begin working on your defense promptly, finding evidence and testimony that could weaken the prosecution's case against you. This can help convince the prosecution to reduce or even drop your charges. And if your case goes to trial, our Arizona domestic violence team of lawyers can help you achieve a not guilty verdict. The experienced Arizona criminal defense attorneys from My AZ Lawyers have the skills set necessary when you're facing allegations of domestic violence. Additionally, our affordable rates and payment plans make it more feasible for you to obtain high-quality legal counsel during this stressful ordeal. Call us at 480-448-9800 to schedule your free consultation with an experienced member of our Arizona law firm, or visit us online at myazlawyers.com.
Thank you for listening to the My AZ Lawyers Law Firm podcast. Facing criminal charges in Arizona is very serious and requires the legal representation and guidance of an experienced criminal defense attorney. At My AZ Lawyers, we'll aggressively defend your case to the best of our abilities. Contact My AZ Lawyers today to get a free evaluation and find the peace of mind you deserve.